Hello and welcome everyone. Hello, Dr. Lome, Julieanna, Chef AJ, and Dr. Mills.
Hello, Stephen.
Thank you
Hello.
for coming to speak at our conference and sharing your information with so many people. So let me just bring everyone up to date on my thinking. You know, we're having a 17-day conference. It's probably the longest conference anyone's ever had. It's from 9 a.m. till 9:30 p.m., 17 days. We've got 75 speakers, doctors, authors, scientists, nutritionists, professors, dietitians. And I guess, you know, the reason that we're doing this is we feel there is something urgent to say. We don't feel like it's 1960 and we just want to say that, you know, people are, you know, having some stomach issues. We feel like we read the health and environmental information, and it seems like there is really, really important information in the world that needs to be shared. Now, at the same time that I'm trying to bring together all these amazing speakers who've written great books and have great information to offer, there's a marketing campaign designed to misinform people. And it's a very smart marketing campaign. They don't necessarily say fried food is bad for you. What they say is, you only live once, don't make such a big deal about everything. That's not going to kill you. Everything in moderation. Just have fun. Don't be that guy who doesn't eat or participate. And so they're trying to convince everyone that it really doesn't matter. Don't worry about the chemicals and pesticides. Don't worry about what you eat. Don't worry about anything. And yet, if you look closely at all the health statistics and environmental statistics, it's very jolting. It's very disturbing. And it's not like it's starting to get really good. It's continuing to trend in disturbing ways. And while we've had a lot of discussion over the years about obesity and diabetes and heart disease, you know, yesterday we had a panel and they were talking about Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and clearly making the case that this is also part of our current lifestyle. So I'd like to open up if each of you could introduce yourselves, tell us what your name is, what you've been doing for the last 20 years, if you have a recent book out or anything, and what the state is of health in America that makes you, well, what's the state of health in America? And let's start from there. So any order, we can go Dr. Mills, Dr. Lome, Chef AJ, and Julieanna. That order sounds good. So why don't you go ahead? Okay. I can't see Julieanna on this screen. Hold on a second. Let me see her. Okay, there you go. Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Milton Mills. I am a critical care and internal medicine physician. I have been practicing medicine for, and it gives me pause to say this, 31 years now. And I am located in the Washington, D.C. Metro area. But I also lecture extensively on the relationship between nutrition and chronic disease. And I see my primary purpose as being here to help educate people on how to take control of their health by modifying their diet and their lifestyle. Because all of the major health problems that we see in the United States and most Western countries are directly related to the ways that we eat and live. And in terms of the current state of health in the United States, it's much worse than it would appear because people are really being fed very unhealthy food. The things that you see advertised on TV, you know, with these giant sandwiches from these fast food operations that are just loaded with these pieces of chicken flesh that literally look just obscene. You see a so-called chicken breast that is almost 3 inches thick. And, you know, forgive me for just focusing on this for a minute, but I want people to think about this. A chicken breast is the part of the muscle that is supposed to help a bird fly. Chickens don't even fly. So the question is, how on earth did a chicken get a breast that is 3 inches thick? It's because these animals are injected with material after they're killed to make the muscle swell up and attain these just ridiculous sizes. And then people turn around, they eat this, and these chemicals go in their bodies, and it creates disease. The pigs, the cows that are being raised are given all sorts of steroids and other chemicals to make them grow at abnormal rates, so that the producers can make all kinds of money. And again, these things are absorbed into the consumers' bodies, and they create disease. So yes, we are seeing just increasing rates of all kinds of autoimmune diseases, cancers, and so forth that are directly related to what people are eating. And we need to get off this death train. And that's what I hope to help people understand, that they can do that by changing their diet and lifestyle. So I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Well, I'm Dr. Stephen Lome. Thanks so much for having me here. It's an honor to be a part of this conference. I am a board certified cardiologist and also boarded in internal medicine, and more recently, lifestyle medicine, which is just such an awesome growing field. I graduated 2010 from my training at Loyola Chicago, and I was really just trained in the simple pills and procedures approach. And I was following a standard American diet, gained a bunch of weight, reached about 270 pounds, and then Forks Over Knives gave you my whole aha moment, where it wasn't only just for my own personal health that I lost all that weight after going plant-based, seeing Forks Over Knives, but it changed my whole mindset as to how I approach patients. It was the biggest missing piece. And I was literally angry that I wasn't taught these things in medical school. I was taught prevention was giving medicines for blood pressure or giving an aspirin. I wasn't taught that prevention should be eating healthy, exercising, losing weight. I was taught heart disease is a progressive disease. It's genetic. Yeah, you know, if you eat healthy, it might slightly slow it down, but you can't stop it. I never heard the name Dean Ornish or Caldwell Esselstyn. And as I learned all this, really just became frustrated, angry, and changed my whole practice. Started working at Rush University, Chicago with Kim Williams, who many of you know. Tried to do a lot of different programs there, and was a great place. And we did a lot of good things, but it was frustrating that our whole system really doesn't make money off of prevention. And it was really hard to get things going. So more recently, I have moved out to Monterey County, California, and doing a lot of great lifestyle medicine initiatives, integrating all that into my practice. And about what I would say about the current state of health, and I'm going to focus, as a cardiologist, on heart disease. It's just so simple. Heart disease has been the #1 killer in America since 1919, every consecutive year for more than 100 years, despite the fact that it is nearly 100% preventable, even reversible. The data is there, the science is solid, and we as a culture, as a food system, as a healthcare system, as a government, have actively decided to ignore the science and ignore the evidence that really shows the cure for America's #1 killer. And it just blows my mind away that we let 500,000 to 600,000 Americans die every year from this disease that we have a cure for sitting in front of our face. And of course, not to mention that it's not just heart disease, it's multiple other disorders as well that can be treated the same way. And so my mission, what I've been doing along with many of these other great people at this conference, is trying to be the messenger, trying to spread the word, the power of lifestyle medicine, that the default state of the human body is to be healthy. It doesn't want to clog arteries or become diabetic or raise blood pressure. That only happens if we actively damage our own bodies. Just eat the right foods, do the right things, and the body's own healing mechanisms will kick in. You'll return to that default state of health that we're all supposed to have. And it's just such a simple concept, a simple message, and why the whole healthcare system hasn't really gotten this and pushed it forward just blows my mind away. So I'm so happy for conferences like this to get this message out. It's at a critical state at this point. So it's all you, Chef AJ.
Hi, I'm Chef AJ, and thank you so much for having me. I feel very honored to be among such esteemed healthcare professionals. I am not a medical professional, so I don't know what the heck I'm doing here, but I will say, even though I don't practice medicine in a way, I practice culinary medicine because I try to help people get well through the use of foods, exclusively plant foods. I think I've been vegan longer than Julieanna has even been alive. It'll be 45 years come September. And what I see is people, unfortunately, getting larger, and not in a judgmental way, but in a health way. The risk, as we know from COVID, when people that were overweight or obese did not fare as well. And I've even lost some of my clients, meaning to death from COVID, the ones that had quite a bit of extra weight on them, having lost so many family members from these preventable diseases like type 2 diabetes, even certain cancers, high blood pressure. I mean, I lost pretty much all my parents and siblings over 20 years ago, and I don't see it getting better. In fact, I see it getting worse. And the information presented at this conference is not just life-changing, but life-saving and planet-saving. And that's why it's such an honor to be here with all the other wonderful speakers, that hopefully we can reach people that we are in crisis right now. Yes, there's a war, but even before the war that's happening now, there has been almost a bigger problem, the war against humanity with these animal products and processed foods that are killing not only people, but the planet. And it's got to stop. And thanks to this conference, maybe the word will get out and people will really wake up.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me. Thank you, everyone. It's so nice to be in this wonderful event. And my name is Julieanna Hever. I've been known as the plant-based dietitian for almost 17 years now. And it's so interesting because I was focused on chronic disease and reversing chronic disease and ameliorating symptoms from chronic disease with my clients over the many years. And now with this whole new paradigm where we're dealing with a communicable disease and non-communicable disease, we're still seeing this correlation between our diet, and diet is still the #1 cause of early death and disability in the world. And so it is so important to talk about food. And so I'm really glad that we're here talking about food today. I just published my 7th book in December called The Choose You Now Diet. And I've kind of been talking about eating whole food plant-based in all sorts of different ways and making it delicious and easy. And I work with all sorts of clients around the world and help people. And I love my job because unlike what I was taught in graduate school, I get to wake up every day and results are typical. I get to help my clients actually get healthy as opposed to help them avoid getting worse. And that was something I didn't know was even possible. And I see it every single day. I've been working with all sorts of different types of situations, and it's extraordinary. So I'm really honored to have this work in front of me, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm excited to answer all the questions.
Can I say something, Steve? Because AJ, you're making a kind of a distinction between what Stephen and I do as doctors and what you do, or even what Julieanna does, and I don't see that difference, because what Stephen and I do is theoretical medicine, and what you guys do is applied medicine. Because, you know, we talk about the theory of why, you know, diet is important and how it impacts a person's physiology. But when we talk about making change, then it comes to the functional and applied way of doing it. And that's what you guys do. So this is literally 2 halves of the same coin. And I think it's really important to understand that. I mean, you know, we need each other and we have to work together. And so, yeah, no, we're in this together for sure.
Great.
100% agree.
Okay, so before I go into a whole bunch of questions about health, does anyone have anything they want to just say that's on their mind regarding animal welfare or the environment, regarding our diet? It's not the focus of this panel, but if there was something that you felt like you was important that you wanted to say regarding either of those things, animal welfare or diet's impact on the environment, anyone want to comment on that at all? Anyone?
If we don't stop screwing up the earth is going to get rid of us. That's what I want to say.
Okay.
I would love to say that it's a wonderful
Well, I
win-win
think it's just the
situation.
obvious that the solution to so many different problems in our whole world, it's all the same, right? It's the solution to our health issue. It's going towards a plant-based diet, to the environmental issue, to one of the biggest ethical issues in our time. It's all the same solution.
I guess what I would say is many of us here on this panel went vegan initially for ethical reasons and some for health reasons. But even if you don't like animals or care about your health, if you don't go vegan, we won't have a planet to even have this conversation on much longer.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so during these 17 days, I'm going to ask a lot of questions, but maybe the most important health question that I'll ask the entire 17 days is simply this. If the number one killer in 2022 and for 100 years before, in 2021, and for 100 years before that was heart disease, if someone followed an ideal whole food plant-based diet and lifestyle, what percent of heart disease could be eliminated? And then the second question is, in what percent of strokes can be eliminated? And if you feel like it, could comment on what percent of diabetes could be eliminated. Anyone can answer that.
So I guess that's probably me. I'm the cardiologist. So what I would say is, it starts in childhood. Plaque, and it takes decades for it to accumulate. So if you started a plant-based lifestyle in childhood, avoided tobacco, exercised, it is approaching 100% of heart disease, approaching it. That would be preventable. And even once you've already developed plaque, it's probably close to, in the 90% range that you could halt it and reverse it if you do all the right things as well. And just to think about all of the people who suffer from these things, if they survive their first heart episode, because 1 out of 3 people, the first symptom of heart disease is sudden death. If you do survive it, and then you have to, suffer all these symptoms and all these other things when it was all preventable, it's a really sad thing. So it just blew my mind away. I'll never forget when I started having this mindset. I did a simple Google search and I just said, hey, I don't even know the answer to this question. I'm a cardiologist. What percent of heart disease is preventable? Nobody ever taught me that in medical training. And when I saw the World Health Organization said 80%, I was like, whoa, that's a big number. And then I looked further, and then people like Dean Ornish, Caldwell Esselstyn, and the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, they pushed that number into the 90s. And I was like, well, why the heck isn't this the main focus of everything that we do? It really should be.
And is stroke the same as heart attack, or is that a separate category?
It's very similar. There's different mechanisms of stroke, but essentially the most common cause of stroke is the exact same thing. Atherosclerosis, you get plaque buildup in the circulation to the brain, and it can clot, cut off the blood supply. And then when a section of the brain doesn't get enough blood, the symptoms of stroke come out. And obviously stroke could be devastating and permanent. It's been the number 3 or 4 cause of death in the United States, going back and forth for a long time. So, it's certainly, and as people always say, for heart disease, a lot of people don't say they're as afraid of heart disease because a lot of times when you just go quickly. But with stroke, it's devastating. You could live with permanent deficits and become dependent. And so a stroke does certainly put the fear into many patients, and they'll say, oh, I'm not that worried about heart disease, but stroke, oh my gosh, I'll do anything to prevent a stroke. I've had patients nowadays, with the heart disease, they have a big heart attack. We put in the stent, they're discharged the next day. They're like, that's my, rite of passage. I had my heart attack and I survived it. Yay, now I can do whatever I want. But then I tell them, listen, man, the same mechanism can cause a stroke. And then they look at me and go, what? And like, yeah, you got to eat healthy and do these lifestyle changes. And it's completely a powerful way to convince people to do the right thing, for sure.
Yeah, and what I explain to people when they come in with their acute heart attack and they get the stent is I tell them that, this stent has opened up a clogged artery, but the process that clogged up that artery is still ongoing. And if you don't do anything to change your lifestyle, you're going to continue to form blockages in other places. And just like you have that blockage in that particular artery, you're blocking arteries in other places, which is probably why you're on Viagra. And, why you're having, problems walking long distances and getting cramping in your legs and so forth. And, the other issue is that if we, as Stephen just said, could magically somehow get everybody on a plant-based diet and get rid of everything that's preventable, that would then free up our resources to treat things like congenital heart problems, the things that people who are born with defects in their heart, or valvular heart disease, the problems that people get from infections and things that they can't help. We could do so much more to help people with problems that are beyond their control and stop wasting money on things that could be completely avoided. That's the tragedy of the American healthcare system, is all of the money we are throwing away on things that honestly don't have to happen. It's like somebody that keeps starting a grease fire in the kitchen and you never get to paint the rest of the house because you're constantly repainting the kitchen. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a very true statement. It's trillions of dollars a year are spent on preventable diseases related to lifestyle. Trillions every single year. What can you do with that money? You could do so much with that money, not to mention just the money part of it. How about all the people who suffer from all these diseases that they don't have to have? I remember when I was having my whole revelation, I had this 40-year-old guy, the nicest guy, hardest working engineer, all this stuff, morbidly obese, had heart attack, bypass, they need an amputation of his leg. He's on insulin. He's on like 20 medications, all this stuff. And I just thought to myself, wow, that was all preventable. Our culture failed this person. Our healthcare system failed this person. Our food system failed this person. Everybody's like failed this person, and it didn't have to happen, but it did to this poor guy. And when you think of all the suffering that goes on, it's just mind blowing that we've turned a blind eye, all because our culture is in unhealthy eating, and there's so much money in it. There's no money in prevention. There's a little ray of hope. I hear that by 2030, Medicare is going to be paying 100% for quality of care instead of quantity of care. So hopefully turning out procedures and all these things is no longer going to be what people do. And then physicians and chefs and nutritionists who promote the health and wellness all of a sudden will be put in the spotlight because the money will be there for prevention. So I hope we're going to see a big change in the next 10 years. And it's partially because of the reality that it's not a sustainable system, that Medicare is going to go broke, and all the messaging that conferences like this have already pushed out to really tell people, wake up, we have the solution that's right here in front of our face. Let's just do it.
I want to add something. It's such an interesting element, and it's so multifactorial. And I think one of the most important things that's often overlooked is there's so much confusion out there. We know that there's so much confusion, but the most important thing that I've seen is that the person themselves have to want to make the changes. And I'll just share a little personal stories. Like last year, my father had a stroke, and he eats a horrible diet. He never wants to listen to me, for all the years I've been trying to convince him. And after he recovered from his stroke, and I said, Dad, what's going on? He's like, oh, I've been eating a little bit, off whatever. And I'm like, yeah, well, Dad, we could fix this. We can make you healthy. And he looked at me, he's like, Joel, you have to want to change. Like even on his bed where he was just conscious, he still didn't want to make those changes. And then his physician told him, and this is not in this country, this is out of the US. The physician told him, just cut out alcohol and caffeine, doesn't matter what you eat. So he liked that information better than what I had to say, and went home and went back to his regular diet.
So just,
I'm sorry, Julieanna, I'm so sorry to hear that, but because I hear that so often, that the patients are just completely misled by their physicians and told that kind of stuff, that, well, it doesn't matter what you eat or, oh God, I'm so sorry. That just really hit me. Sorry.
So just to clarify, when it comes to heart attacks or heart disease or strokes, if a person doesn't start when they're a child, if they start when they're 40 or 50 or 60, and then they strictly adhere to a whole food, plant-based diet and a healthy lifestyle, do you sometimes still see heart disease, fatal heart attack, strokes? Like how is it like, is someone who's follows this diet completely not going to get a stroke or heart disease? Or can you, if you have enough salt, can you still do it? If you have enough coconut oil, like how much does it, Dr. Esselstyn uses the phrase heart attack proof. Is that like, to what degree there's a lot of things to worry about in this world. When it comes to heart disease and stroke, if people are eating a whole food, plant-based diet and healthy lifestyle, how risk-free are they? Are there still cases that the four of you see where occasionally someone following this lifestyle still ends up succumbing to heart disease and stroke?
So I would say that if somebody is 100% whole food, plant-based, no oil, and they achieve an LDL cholesterol at least less than 70, and we could tell that their inflammatory markers are negative, it's extraordinarily rare for them to have an event or for them to progress their disease. Now, there are a lot of nuances involved in atherosclerosis and heart disease, so nothing is ever 100% for sure. But the science, Esselstyn did some great research and published some great papers. It's not quite at the level of large randomized controlled trials with hundreds and hundreds or thousands of patients. You can't really control these things well. So it's really hard to say without very high degree of confidence that it's going to be 100% heart attack proof, but it's going to be at least right in that 90-something% range. And it's never too late. It's never too late. You can calm the inflammation by changing your diet. You can reverse the disease. Dean Ornish has shown that by changing your diet, and your event rate will markedly reduce to as close to zero. And answering your last question, I have had only one patient that I've ever seen who was following whole food, plant-based, no oil, have an event. And he wasn't quite following Esselstyn's program. There was a lot of nuts and seeds and other things where Esselstyn will be like, well, there you go. But a lot of people say that the inflammation and the plaque does take a few years. It took decades and decades and decades to build up. So all that vulnerability can take a long time to become more stabilized. It's not going to happen in just a year or two. So if somebody's been following it for 5 or 10 years, I've never seen somebody have an event. It's somebody who's changed, and it was like a year or two later that they had an event. But again, it takes a long time. And when you have all that plaque, so you get the flu or you get COVID, your whole body becomes inflamed. It can make a plaque vulnerable. So there's always things that could happen that don't relate to your diet, but you're markedly well protected if you do all the right things. Not quite 100% but you're very close to that, very close to 100.
Yeah, the analogy I would use is, someone says, well, if I stop driving crazy, am I still going to get into a wreck? Well, it depends on at what point you put on the brakes. I mean, if you are, doing 80 miles an hour and you slam on the brakes and you're only 2 car lengths behind someone, you're still going to hit them. So, if the point at which someone switches to a whole food, plant-based diet, they've already got, 90% blockages in 2 or 3 arteries. And as Steve said, they then get some, major inflammatory illness that destabilizes those plaques. They may very well go on to have a cardiac event. But if they don't have such severe blockages, they become whole food plant-based and they, adhere to that. 5 years down the road, no major illnesses, they will probably have reversed those blockages to the point that they would be unlikely to go on to have those events. Again, it just depends on where they are when they start. And that also is true for other diseases like cancer, although that can be, there are other factors that come into play when you're talking about cancers and so forth. So, but the fact is that you will always do better. You will always be better protected. once you convert to a whole food, plant-based diet. And again, we're talking a healthy whole food plant-based diet. You can't, a healthy whole food plant-based diet with not a lot of junk food, not a lot of oil. And I'm not saying that you have to be, a monk in a monastery and never look at a vegan cookie, but just, good, a really good, healthy, whole food plant-based diet.
Thank you. What have the four of you found regarding people who've come to you seeking counsel advice regarding weight loss? In the real world, not the theoretical world, what really happens? In other words, of the last 100 people who came to you who said, I'm 20 to 50 pounds overweight, you advised them, what happened? Did they lose weight? Did some lose and some just wouldn't work? Like, what's the reality of weight loss? Not the theory, what's really happening when real people come to you, you give them your best advice. Are they losing? Some not, some yes. What is each of your experience regarding weight loss?
I've been doing a lot of weight loss the last few years, and it's just amazingly predictable at this point. My clients lose 0.4 to 0.8 pounds of body fat a day predictably. And if not, I could always look at the food journal and know why. It is always the food. You are not broken. If you can't lose weight, it's the food. And so you just look at what people are eating. For the first time in so many years, over the last few years, I've had people come to me with very similar issues with weight and health issues that have been on a vegan diet, but they've been eating a lot of the processed foods. Like if you look at their food journals, they're eating burgers, candies, cookies, like all the stuff that we know are not going to help contribute to weight loss or a healthy weight maintenance. So it's always a food, and it's really easy to predict, and you just need to stick to the wholer foods, and you have to create a deficit. There's no way around it. But eating a whole food plant-based, there's a million ways to lose weight. You can lose weight all sorts of ways, but the healthiest way to do so is with this way of eating. So it's been quite extraordinary, and I love the predictability of it, because there's so much confusion out there, especially when it comes to weight loss. And so it's been really exciting to see.
What I was going to say is a lot of the people that come to me are more interested in being thin than they are being healthy. And they might have suffered with their weight from a very long time, even from childhood. And then there's some defining event in their life, like a daughter's wedding or a high school reunion. And they come to you, or they come to me like a month before, and they want to lose weight and they want to lose it quickly. And they're more interested in being thin than being healthy. And they're not willing to necessarily change their lifestyle. And so they're looking for a diet, which they've done millions of times in their life, that has resulted in short-term weight loss, but they're not necessarily all willing to do what I think all the experts on this panel agree, a whole food, plant-based, unprocessed diet for the long term.
And so I get things. Yeah, I agree with both of what you both said, 100%. But what the difference is you get people seeking you out with the motivation, the interest that I want to lose weight. I get people coming in to me because they just had a heart attack or some kind of an event, a hospitalization. And they're like, wait a second, Dr. Lome, why are you spending 80% of the time of our visit talking about diet and lifestyle? What about my meds? What about all these things? Any other testing? Do I know? Like, no, listen, the cause of your disease is diet and lifestyle. That's what the treatment should be, is eating healthy, staying active, losing weight, all this stuff. And I many times get the deer in the headlights, like, what the heck? Oh my gosh, I didn't expect this. You get people who are resistant to change. So in reality, what percentage of my patients do I get to get significant weight loss? The way our healthcare system is set up, you get a short appointment with your doctor. They tell you eat healthy. I can give them all these resources. I send them emails. I message them back and forth through our computer system, but a lot of them don't come to me motivated. I try to educate them as hard as I can. And if you really spend the time, half an hour to an hour at least, what do you eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner? Explain to them the science as to why it's so important. I can get at least half of my patients to make significant changes, but still, I think one of the reasons why doctors don't promote this as much, a lifestyle medicine approach, is they're not, of course, they're not educated in it. They don't do it themselves, but they don't get paid for it. It takes a lot of time, so they don't get reimbursed. And then even if they have that passion and they know and they follow it, they spend all this time with these patients and they realize that they didn't get through to them, and they come back and they gain further weight and they get frustrated. And it's because our system is just not set up. And that's one of the things that really made me mad when I had my whole realization, is that we are just set up to make people fail. And in order to help people, we need to have the cooking classes, the free nutritionists, dietitians, everything needs to be there to help them, because a lot of people just don't have the ability, the motivation, the social situation to be able to run with making these lifestyle changes when it's like when they had that event and they're stuck. And now they will realize that's what I would need to do, but they go home and everybody at home eats processed foods and standard American diet, and they're not on board and they won't change. There's so many barriers, right? So it's harder from my perspective, because I do get some people coming to me because they know I'm the plant-based cardiologist and they don't want the stent or they don't want the bypass. And okay, those people, different story. But when it's the event that just happened to them and I'm trying to educate them and focus on it, it's much more of a challenge. And so that's why I lean on as many resources as I can to send them to, if they're motivated. But if they're not, it's a struggle. So I do think our system needs to wake up and just create way more resources for people in every single region to help them be successful with this.
I have been trying to find money to fund this concept I've come up with called the Vegan Action Team, for that very reason. And the Vegan Action Team is comprised of a dietitian, vegan chef, a vegan life coach, all supervised by a physician that will go in and literally for a 12-week period, just kind of really help take over a person's life. For the first 4 weeks, the chef cooks all of the person's food with the person watching, so they understand what it means to be plant-based. The next 4-week period, supervises the person preparing their own food. Last 4 weeks, watches the person prepare their own food, make sure they're doing it properly. During this time, the life coach is teaching them how to reorganize their life to shop in a vegan way, because you know what happens when people try to become plant-based? They go out and they buy a bunch of food, bring it home, and it rots in the refrigerator, because you have to learn how to shop vegan so that you don't buy stuff that you can't use before it goes bad. And you know, again, the dietitian is helping them to figure out what foods will work best with the disease process you're trying to treat, while the doctor is looking at the numbers, making sure that we're making progress on helping to reverse whatever problem you're having. I'm trying to, again, as I said, I think that this, if I can find money to really put this into action, I can take this and prove to insurance companies that this will work and this will lower their costs, and it will be really effective at actually reversing patients' disease process, and it will save money in the long run. But that's what it's going to take to really make this effective and functional and work.
On a massive scale. Yeah.
Yes.
What do you do when someone comes to you and you find out that their blood sugar is high? What in the real world, again, what works to get blood sugar down to a very appropriate level? I don't know what that is. Maybe that's under 100, or maybe even lower. You know, what do you do, and does it work? In other words, if someone comes to you, advise them on how to get their blood sugar down, and then you follow up with them. Are you always able to get it down, or are there some cases where even someone eating healthy, their blood sugar is stubborn and they stay in a pre-diabetic or diabetic state?
Well, I will say, number one of the things that I am super thrilled about are these new continuous monitor systems that they have now, so that people can essentially monitor their blood sugars continuously in real time without having to poke themselves, because now you can do almost moment by moment monitoring. But the key here is that the patient has to be motivated to want to bring their blood sugar down. So in these instances, I talk to them about, and we're assuming that we're talking about a type 2 diabetic where the issue is insulin resistance and not the total lack of insulin. I talk to them about insulin resistance and how food choices impact insulin resistance, and that if they are really serious about getting the diabetes under control, they've got to make different food choices. We talk about how high fat foods, animal foods, increase insulin resistance, how whole plant foods, low fat plant foods, fiber containing plant foods help reverse that process, and that we need to start switching over to a plant-based diet to control the diabetes, but that even that process is going to take a while because their body has to remake itself. And that's going to take a period of weeks, which is why we're going to do frequent blood sugar monitoring. But the fact is you cannot repair fire damage to a house while the house is on fire. So while we're trying to bring these sugars under control, we're going to still need to use medications. But as their body is becoming more sensitive to the insulin as they're converting to this plant-based diet, we will be able to start weaning those medications off, which again is why we need to do the frequent blood sugar measurements so that we know when to start cutting back and cutting out the medications again as the plant-based diet is starting to become more effective. So that's the method I try to use with patients.
What I do a lot of, is it's frustrating because a lot of times patients will come and they've already seen the diabetic educator who's already told them chicken and fish, low-fat dairy products, count your carbohydrates, you can't go that many carbs, carbs are bad, all this stuff like that. So they already have this in their mind. And then they come to me and I'm like, okay, well, that's not ideal for heart health. 70% of diabetics die from heart disease. We need to focus on heart health. The American, and I lean on the science, and I'll say, listen, the American Diabetic Association does have a statement. It's based on Neil Barnard's study, where he did a randomized controlled trial comparing the standard American Diabetic Association dietary plan to a whole food vegan diet that was low in fat, showing that there was superior control. You had weight loss without counting carbohydrates and without counting calories. And the American Diabetic Association has a statement that says that if you choose to go on a 100% plant-based, healthy vegan diet, you don't need to count your carbohydrates and you'll be fine. It's a successful approach. And I say that's what you want to do to also have heart disease prevention, because it's one thing to lose a little bit of weight and you're still eating, chicken and low-fat dairy and fish, but your cholesterol numbers are still high. You're still causing injury to your arteries. And there's, of course, cancer risk and other stuff with those animal-based foods as well. But if you want long-term health and longevity, prevent heart disease, you got to do the plant-based approach, the whole food plant-based approach. The science shows it works. Here's the study. Here's the American Diabetic Association statement. Let's do it this way. And do you really want to count your carbs all the time? Do you? No? Okay. Well, then do it this way. You don't have to count your carbs, right? So, and I loved hearing McDougall tell the story of patients, all these diabetics coming into his program, and they are on these diabetic medications for insulin resistance for type 2 diabetes. 1 week on his program with a buffet of whole food, plant-based, low-fat food, 1 week, a majority of them walk out of there not on their medications, not needing them because their blood sugars are better. That's how powerful it is. And so weaning off the meds quickly is important. And what's also, again, interesting is that the American College of Cardiology in their hypertension guidelines has a very similar statement that if you follow these lifestyle recommendations, including a whole food plant-based diet, you need to closely monitor your blood pressure, or you'll find out you're over-medicated, your blood pressure will drop, you'll pass out on the ground, and the medicines have to be weaned off quickly. That's how powerful it is when people go all in.
This whole thing about counting carbs, I'll never forget learning this in grad school. We had these little food models we were trying to teach our patients, and it was so confusing. Even as someone that was studying this, it was so ridiculous. And I've come to call this whole concept macro confusion. And it's so ridiculous to think that if we are going to micro manage our macros, which is what so many people are trying to do for so many reasons, that it's going to have any kind of benefit it's absolutely absurd. And I love to go back to that study in 2018 in the Lancet journal, where it said the conclusion was that a low carb diet and a high carb diet increase mortality. Like, what does that even mean? And so it just, everyone's confused, even at a research level, when you start talking about carbs, because a lentil stew would be placed in the same category as, say, a Snickers bar, because the amount of carbohydrates, like they're completely differently metabolized in the body. So macros is like the biggest confusion. And so on a practical level, what does it look like when a client comes to me with hyperglycemia or pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes? What I do is put them on a whole food plant-based diet, but what you have to do is knock out the saturated fat. You have to reduce the saturated fat a lot. And of course, the easiest way to do that is by cutting out animal products. And of course, you don't want to have, coconut products, coconut oil, all that stuff as well, because that's really high in saturated fat too. But you want to focus on reducing the saturated fat, the animal products, the refined foods, so that they're getting all the fiber and they're going to have a different kind of metabolism of these foods, and just bring the conversation back to food rather than talk about carbs, proteins, fats, and all of that. But it's really important to just focus on whole plant foods. Of course, everyone's going to say that here. We're all on the same page.
Okay, so for all four of you, and Chef AJ, you could start. What is your thought on whole plant fats, such as raw seeds, meaning chia, flax, hemp, sesame, sunflower, pumpkin, raw nuts, meaning walnuts, pecans, filberts, almonds, Brazil nuts, macadamians, raw olives, and avocados? Let's call that category 1, in their intact fats and plant-based fats. And then category 2, oils such as hemp, flax, and olive. Now, before you answer, there are people who are whole food plant-based diet people who are sort of, I guess I would call them pro fats. They speak highly of like nuts and seeds and say there's a lot of studies saying they're beneficial. And then there's some people that feel like the oils are okay as well. I'm confused why there's so much confusion on this. I'm confused why there's confusion. So where do each of you stand on category 1, the seeds, nuts, olives, and avocados, and category 2, the oils like hemp, flax, and olive?
Well, I think there's a big difference between whole food fats that are found in nature, like nuts, seeds, avocados, and olives, and processed fats, refined and extracted oil. I have a new book that just came out called Unprocessed. It's actually the 10th anniversary. And what I tried to do in that book was make the case that even if you eat animal products, which I don't think is a good idea, we're meant to eat our food from whole plants, not processed plants. And throughout most of human history, we didn't eat processed food. And we certainly didn't eat processed oils. And so I don't understand what the benefit would be, because I agree that people need fat, but why would you need them in a very concentrated, refined form where all of the essential nutrients, the vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, the fiber, the water have been removed? And so what I say to people that say, well, I have to have oil, I say to them, is there anything that you get in this processed olive oil or coconut oil that you couldn't get from eating the whole food? And they always say no. So my feeling is if there's a benefit to the oil, whatever's in that oil that you feel you need, you could get in a better, more calorically dilute, healthier form in the whole food plant form with the fiber and the water intact. So I am for eating, not just eating vegan, but eating whole foods. And oil is not a whole food. And of course, I'm sure the doctors, and Julieanna knows, at least all the studies that Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Ornish have done, that oil can be deleterious to people's endothelial and promote heart disease, things like that. It's very calorically dense. That's why people like it. As I said today in my talk, the more calorically dense, the more dopamine is released. But I don't see a benefit for anyone eating oil other than it's convenient if you're eating at a restaurant, but I don't see any health benefits. So I am a fan of getting your fats from whole food sources. That said, the majority of the people I work with identify as food addicts, and they can't be downing a bunch of nuts and seeds all the time like people that have never struggled or been overweight. So I recommend a more moderate amount, like an ounce of nuts a day, or even better, flax and chia seed to get their omega-3 fatty acids. Nuts and seeds are very healthy, as are avocados and oil. But those of us that have really struggled with our weight for a long time can't always moderate the use of these delicious high-fat plant foods. So I'm not anti-fat, but I am anti-oil. Oil is for cars, not for humans.
I agree 100% with everything Chef AJ said. And for those of you interested, I have a 17-minute video on my YouTube channel about why you shouldn't be eating oil, or to word it differently, who can tolerate a little bit of oil, like olive oil, in their diet. And I always say, hey, if you're at your ideal body weight, your LDL is under 70, you have no inflammatory markers that are elevated, and you have no significant, very strong genetic predisposition to heart disease or diabetes or something like that, then maybe a teeny little bit of olive oil you can tolerate. Because I mean, the truth is, some people can tolerate some without negative effects, but it doesn't mean it's healthy for you. Eat the olive, not the olive oil, just like you should eat the orange and not drink the orange juice, is what I always say. And regarding nuts in any form, whether they're almonds or walnuts or whatever, as to should we be eating them or not, honestly, the one big thing I always think to myself is while we argue over should we have nuts or not for heart disease prevention and how much and all these things like that, what's really winning is fast food and sugar and junk. And so arguing over these little points, I understand people are already whole food plant-based and really highly motivated and trying to make the really extreme changes, want to know this information, but our focus needs to be just in general, getting rid of the processed foods and eliminating the animal foods. And then we'll have more people following whole food plant-based, and we could tease out more the optimal situation for the nuts, because I do think the data is a little confusing. It's not strong enough. You could argue points both ways. If you have heart disease, are nuts okay to have in a certain amount, or nuts not okay? Esselstyn removed nuts completely. Ornish had just a teeniest little bit to try to keep the total percentage of calories from fat at 10% or so. And Esselstyn's argument was what Chef AJ said, is that who can eat a small amount of nuts? Like nobody can. It's the fat taste is very addictive. So, people go nuts on the nuts. And so that's why if you just kind of eliminate them altogether, you get rid of that fat craving. And it not only helps you to not eat the fats that come from nuts, but it helps you to not eat the saturated fats and the other fats that are there too, because you no longer crave that fat taste. So in my patients that are highly, highly, highly motivated, will do anything and they can do it, I do say if they have heart disease, go ahead and be nut free. But similar to oil, if they don't have heart disease and they're struggling trying to stay in the plant-based diet, I say, well, listen, some nuts are fine, especially if your LDL cholesterol is under 70, if you're at your ideal body weight, you don't have inflammation, all these things. Okay, you can have a little bit more nuts as long as all your markers look fine. And if that's what it takes to make you compliant and stick with it because you're struggling otherwise, I kind of say that's fine to have at least a little bit more in those instances. So you got to tailor it to each individual because each person's a little different.
I include 1 to 2 ounces nuts and seeds, 30 to 40 grams of nuts and seeds a day, as per like the cardiometabolic recommendations that I've read in the literature. And it's part of my 6 daily threes, which are just like the foods that I recommend prioritizing the diets. And nuts and seeds, if you have a problem with them, there's ways around it. Like you measure them out, or you could blend them up. So that's not easy to do hand to mouth. I have a lot of my clients that have similar situation, AJ, where they can't stop. I know a lot of people that are like that for sure. And yeah, the hand to mouth. And so instead I have them blend it up and make it into a dressing or a sauce so that's controllable. And then I tap it out at 1 to 2 ounces a day. And because that seems to be supported in the evidence. And then you get your essential fats. It's a great way to get your essential fats. But I too I do not recommend oils. All of my recipes are oil free, and oil is pure fat, just like white sugar is pure carbohydrate, just like protein powder is pure protein. And we really want to eat the whole intact food rather than getting rid of the most important fiber and most of the nutrition that you get rid of when you extract the oils from the whole plants. So definitely from whole food sources. And that's what I recommend.
So I usually divide things into disease, not diseased. For people who are confronting a disease, be it heart disease, cancer, or something, they go into the disease category. And for those people, I would say you want to try and keep the fat content of your diet to 10% or less. For them, you want to be super strict in terms of any added oil or anything like that. If you're not diseased, if you are just really trying to adhere to a very healthy diet, again, you want to try and have your oil exposure, as people here have already said, in whole plant food form. But I do think that nuts and seeds are and should be a healthy addition and a regular part of a healthy whole food plant-based diet. And by regular, I don't mean necessarily every day, but that they should be in the mix, because studies have shown that they have benefits. And when you look at studies on nuts and seeds, they clearly have benefits for our health. But you can get them in various forms. You can get them in visible and invisible form. What do I mean by that? You can have a handful of, walnuts, or you can grind the walnuts up and use them in dishes that you make, or almonds, or whatever nuts that you're planning to use. And yeah, you want to limit your exposure to extracted oils to a bare minimum, if at all. But if you're not diseased, I think the sweet spot for the amount of oil in your diet is like 15, less than 20% of calories, maybe 15 to 20. But if you're dealing with a disease state, you want to try and be around 10% or so. I think if you try to get less than 10%, you do run into problems with getting enough essential oils. So that's my advice to people. But yeah, try to limit extracted oils, because it's not good. Try to limit your exposure to fried foods and things like that.
So one last thing I just wanted to piggyback on, and I think because a lot of people listen to this when they hear this message for the first time, oh, what about this study that shows olive oil is good? What about this one? What about this? What about this one? And there's so many studies, olive oil, olive oil, olive oil. And almost always it's what we call a substitutionary benefit, meaning animal fat was removed from these people's diet and olive oil was inserted into the diet, and there was improved outcomes. And the reason there was improved outcomes is because the saturated fat was reduced dramatically, not because the olive oil was added. That doesn't make olive oil good for you. That makes olive oil less harmful to you than the fat that came from animal-based foods. The way I kind of say it is, you did a study that kind of compared cyanide to arsenic. And they're like, oh, look, people die so much faster when they get cyanide compared to arsenic. Oh, arsenic must be good for you, right? Because not that many people died on arsenic, but all these people died with the cyanide arm of the study. All right, I'm going to go eat a bunch of arsenic, right? No. Arsenic's still not good for you. It's just less harmful. Yeah. That's all. And that's the analogy that comes up with the olive oil and the studies almost, all the time. It's a substitutionary benefit.
It's like Dr. Goldhammer always says, just because something is less bad doesn't make it good. And, I have personally never seen anyone lose weight or get healthier by adding processed oils, but I have seen hundreds of people reclaim their health, reverse their heart disease, diabetes, and lose weight quite easily when they refrained from eating oil.
If each of the four of you could comment then on what seems to be the punchline, that if someone said, don't use the word vegan or vegetarian or plant-based, just tell me what exactly it is you're saying. It seems like what we're saying is to eat beans and whole grains, obviously vegetables, but that's kind of the obvious thing. But it really sounds like we're saying when it comes to dinner time and you're hungry and you're not eating animal products, we're saying, and we're not emphasizing nuts and seeds as the main thing. It sounds like we're saying beans and whole grains is the core of what we're saying. Is that what each of the four of you, is that what you're saying is the main thing that you're recommending for dinner? Or is that what would
I love to say, I want you to eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations. Bring that conversation back to food. And there's no limit to the variety in all the combinations of those ingredients that you can make delicious and nutritious at home.
Very well said.
I like to tell people the only white things at your table should be the tablecloth and the people eating dinner. But no, I like to, and as far as the food, you want something that came off a tree, got pulled out of the ground, or that grew from a plant.
If it doesn't grow, don't eat it. Unprocessed. I always say fruits, vegetables, beans, lentils, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. And one of the big mistakes people make when they go more whole food plant-based is they're just not satisfied. They don't, the satiety when they are only eating vegetables or whatever. And so trying to focus on the beans and lentils, which have a higher satiety index, or potatoes, as long as you keep them fat-free. Sweet potatoes may be a little bit better than the white potatoes, but just keep them fat-free. Eat enough until you're full, but make sure that you're focusing on a wide variety. You don't want to do something crazy like eat only bananas all day, because then, okay, that's not good. So it's got to be a good variety, unprocessed, plant-based. And that's all you need to do. It's that simple. And that's the beauty of it, right? It's that simple. Just a variety of unprocessed plant-based foods, and that's it.
And I stopped using the word plant-based about 11 years ago, and I prefer plant exclusive, because plant-based, a lot of people think that means they can still eat, 49% of their calories from animal products or processed foods. So I prefer to say plant exclusive because sometimes the V word does turn people off in certain settings if I'm teaching at a spa or something like that. But I always tell people, eat food that comes from a plant instead of food that was manufactured in a plant. And if it had a face or a mother, don't eat it.
Yeah, so that's
exclusive. I like that.
Yeah, exclusively plant-based, 100% plant-based. I do still use the word whole food vegan sometimes, but I do agree that the V word sometimes gets people.
I will say nothing that ever had a mother, a face, or a foot. And the reason I put the foot in there is to get shellfish.
When people come to you, when your patients come to you and their blood sugar is high, and they say, okay, I'm gonna eat a whole food plant-based diet, and they go home and they fill a giant bowl with wild rice and chickpeas and sweet potatoes. If they're leaving out the vegetables and they're eating large quantities, it still seems like you could keep your blood sugar high from that. It's not like in cucumbers where it never goes up. So do you find that in all cases, people who follow this get their blood sugar down to appropriate levels, or can you abuse the beans and grains and not mix them with vegetables and just have so much whatever is in it? I don't know if it's sugar or whatever in the complex carbohydrates that you still keep your blood sugar too high.
It would be hard to do it. But I do think if you're eating whole food, plant-based, no oil, fat-free, low fat, and you didn't, pound the vegetables as much as you should or whatever, it still would be hard to keep your sugars high in the long term if you stuck to it, right? So you'd really have to try hard to overeat a lot, like massive calorie, which is harder to do when you have so much fiber in your food and you're focusing on the more starchy stuff, which does, again, have the higher satiety index and make you feel more full. I think if you focused on something like that and overate an insane amount and tried to beat it, sure, fine. Maybe that wouldn't work. But if you're eating a normal amount and not quite doing it right by not eating enough vegetables or whatever, if you focused on potatoes, wild rice, and some beans and such, I think you'd still lose weight. You still get your sugars down. That would still work.
Okay. Now, one question that is an issue that I'm finding is that when people say whole food plant-based, they're saying beans, grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables. And then there's people like Brian Clement at Hippocrates and Gabriel Cousins that are saying, hey, we used to serve fruit, but we feel that it feeds under the microscope yeast, mold, fungus, candida, and cancer. And there's a guy, and they say, Thomas Seyfried of Boston College has done studies, and it shows that it feeds these things. So and they're saying that in nature, fruit was wild grapes and wild blackberries are low glycemic, where the ones that we get in the stores have been bred, they're hybridized, they're sweeter and bigger. So they're making the case that fruit is not the same as it used to be, and therefore you could get yourself have issues with it. Have you heard of their argument, and do you have any thought on it?
Well, there's a couple of silly points to the argument. Well, first of all, flip it around. What about, like was mentioned by Milton before, what about the animals nowadays? You think those are natural? So, if you don't want to eat the natural, unprocessed, plant-based stuff because it's been genetically modified somehow or selectively bred, come on, look at the chickens, look at the pigs, look at the other things. It's even more horrendous and horrific that a chicken can't even walk. It falls over. It's so heavy because it's been modified. But sure, yeah, avoiding higher glycemic index fruits to an excessive degree, like dried fruits, maybe not going too crazy on the dates and some of the raisins. You don't want to eat 10 pounds of them, whatever. Slightly, but I don't see any major truth, because if you think about all these randomized controlled trials, those research studies, the Ornish, all this stuff, they included these foods. And you still reversed heart disease, and you had dramatic reductions in events. So clearly the science, the data is showing that you can include these in your diet and have it be healthy and safe. And the whole, yeah, it's different than what it used to be. Sure, fine, I get that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the wrong choice.
And it's not that different. These people clearly need more fiber in their diet, because the amount of extra, fructose you will get from the, handful of grapes that you can eat, from, the bunch of grapes you buy at the store, is not going to make that big a difference. It's not that much of an extra glycemic load. These people are literally trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. I mean, it is an absurd, ridiculous argument. Given the size of the human stomach, it's not significant in terms of a given meal, the amount that you will eat. So no, it's a ludicrous argument to make. It will not make any significant difference at any given meal. So you can just throw that argument right out the window.
I spent 8 years working at the True North Health Center, and Dr. Goldhammer is going to be on this summit. You can ask him. He's seen over 40,000 patients. I don't think one admission was because of eating too much fruit. And all the years that I worked in a hospital in critical care as a respiratory therapist, never once on the chart was somebody admitted because over consuming fruit. We already are making it difficult enough for many people to adopt a plant-exclusive diet, especially when we're telling them to take away oil, and you tell them to take away fruit, and you've lost them. Fruit is what makes this diet sustainable, delicious. We are meant to eat fruit. Our ancestors ate fruit all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And if you're going to present that viewpoint, I think it's only fair you present the opposite viewpoint and have Dr. Robbie Barbero and Dr. Cyrus Kambata on this conference, who eat primarily a fruit-based diet with type 1 diabetes and have literally helped thousands of people improve their insulin sensitivity and reverse their type 2 diabetes eating massive amounts of fruit.
By the way, we did invite them, but they weren't available. Just
okay, well, I'll tell them they better come next time. I'll text them right now.
So when I hear you talk about animal products and sugar, I take it very seriously and I hear it. But for some reason, the subject of salt doesn't seem to be registering. And I have flax crackers that have salt, and I have sauerkraut that has salt. And sometimes if I'm in a restaurant and they serve the guacamole, it has salt. And I don't seem to be like registering like that I'm doing something. With sugar, I'm completely, absolutely, I will not eat it if it is sugar. What is your thought on salt? Am I supposed to be taking it seriously as a health concern, or is there more flexibility?
Salt is an important issue, especially for blood pressure and for gastrointestinal risk for cancer, certain things like that. But the American Heart Association recommends really trying to get it below 1,500, really 2,300. But if you have an issue, to stay below 1,500 milligrams a day. And the cool thing about sodium, and I've seen this with hundreds of people that I've worked with, is that you can really manage your palate. And you could, if you have a little bit too much and you need more, it's like you increase your threshold for cravings or for need for that salting. So you could actually go down and reduce and start to notice the natural salt flavor, saltiness in foods like celery or actual whole foods. But it just takes an adjustment. And once you do that, it's really easy to enjoy your food without all of that sodium. But if it's easy to do if you're avoiding processed foods, because that's where it's in there. But it's again compared to what? Like if you look at the same amount of bread versus potato chips, and the bread, the salt is baked in, you have the same amount of salt, but because the salt is on the surface of the chip, you taste it because it makes right onto your tongue. So, not cooking with it, adding it at the end, or using it in small doses and trying to maintain it under 1,500 milligrams a day by eating whole foods and not and not using all the extra processed foods that you get at the store is it's not that hard to do, but it is important. I do recommend people mind their sodium.
I do agree too. So I think that there's some distinctions that need to be made, of course, because you have the difference between somebody with hypertension or heart failure, which I deal with a lot, which is a lot of fluid retention. The science is extraordinarily strong that you should limit salt intake. 1,500 milligrams is a great number to try to keep it under. For the healthy person who eats plant-based, that's when the data, the science is a little more foggy. And I've read through it and all the studies. And of course, there's very few studies that have exclusively whole food plant-based eaters. Almost all the studies on salt are people who are more standard American or something like that. So to try to extrapolate how salt would impact somebody who ate whole food plant-based is extraordinarily difficult and challenging. And I had a hard time figuring this out myself, because when I hear other experts like McDougall, who put salt shakers on the table at his buffets, and then I talked to Kim Williams, who I trust a lot. I haven't met another physician that's more genuine and into the data and scientific without any conflicts of interest than Kim Williams, the past ACC president. And I asked him, specifically, what's the data on salt in healthy people, especially eat more whole food plant-based? And he's just like, I don't know. It's a question that I don't think the science has answered, but common sense would say, don't go crazy with it. Don't really overdo it. Now, it helps. The thing where salt comes into play is when people are struggling to maintain the healthy diet, and you're asking them again to give up all these other things, give up the animal products. Most salt comes from processed foods. So as long as you got rid of processed foods completely, letting them put some salt on their whole unprocessed plant-based meals, if they don't have hypertension or heart failure or a very high tendency for heart disease, is that really going to devastate their health? And if it helps them to maintain the diet, the plant-based in the long term, I don't think it's as devastating. Of course, don't go 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 milligrams, which a lot of Americans do. I forget the average number. It's something like 8,000 or 8,300 milligrams of salt. It's some insane number that the average American eats every day. And so heart disease, heart failure, don't do it. Most salt comes from processed foods. If you're whole food plant-based and you're healthy, it's the data, the science is really questionable. Still don't go bonkers with it, but if it was a little bit here and there to help you maintain it or make something taste good when you have guests over that aren't whole food plant-based, whatever, I don't think it's devastating personally.
Let me throw my curveball in there. And that is that in talking with a good friend of mine, Dotsie Bosch, who was Olympic medalist at the London Games in 2012, salt is extremely important for people who are exercising extensively and elite athletes, because they are losing a lot of it as they're exercising. And if their sodium level drops appreciably and they're not replacing it, they will start getting really severe muscle cramps. So again, if you are actively exercising and doing a lot of exercise, you got to make sure you're staying sodium replete. And I just want to add, since my sort of thing in the plant-based movement is trying to point out to people that we are natural herbivores, is that our desire and taste for salt is one of the things that points out that we are herbivores, because all herbivores have a natural desire for salt. If you think about it, in the wild, herbivores search out salt licks and actively seek salt, whereas carnivores do not. So carnivores have no internal mechanism to tell them to seek salt. And there were actually some rather unfortunate studies that were done in the 1950s where they artificially depleted dogs' food of salt, and they fed the dogs and had a little bowl of salt right next to their food. And the dogs came out every day, ate their food, didn't lick the salt, and died from sodium depletion. So anyway, the fact that we like salt points out that we are plant eaters. But as Steve said, do not overdo it, because you can do that, and that will interfere with your health.
Well, there's an old saying, when you're a hammer, you see everything as a nail. And because most of the people that I'm working with are coming to me because they have food addictions and are trying to lose weight, I will tell you that for these people, salt is a very, very powerful appetite stimulant. The more salt you eat, the more food you'll eat. And if your goal is to lose weight by eating less food, it's probably not a good strategy. But I agree, of course, with Julieanna that almost all the salt most people are getting is coming from processed food where it's hidden, not from table salt. So I will tell you, as a chef, there are ways to make your food absolutely delicious without salt. I find salt a very lazy way to season food. It's addictive. As Dr. Goldhammer says, it's a chemical that's added to the food that fools the brain satiety mechanism, causes people to eat at least 11% more calories. So what I recommend for people that aren't willing to ditch the salt shaker are to use things that have salt in them, that are salty tasting, but that have less sodium. For example, a teaspoon of table salt has roughly 2,400 milligrams of sodium. A teaspoon of a low sodium miso, which is very salty tasting and has health benefits, has approximately 110 milligrams of sodium per teaspoon. So salt is 24 times the amount of sodium as miso. And with the miso, you're still getting a salty flavor and you're getting health benefits. Things like coconut aminos have about 90 milligrams of sodium per teaspoon. Again, a 1:24 ratio. So for people that aren't completely willing to ditch the salt shaker and learn how to cook SOS free and use things like herbs and spices, I think that is a much better option. Also, even if you do eat salt, just like even if you do eat sugar and oil, never cook with it because it dissipates. If you're browning onions with oil and then make it into a soup, you can't taste it anymore, just like you can't taste salt in cooking. So my preference is to do what Dr. McDougall does and let people add it at the table where the taste buds on the tip of their tongue can actually taste the salt. That said, if somebody is interested in going truly SOS free, that's my niche, and I've learned how to make food taste delicious. But it could take about a month of eating no salt or going lower salt for food to taste good, because people have neuroadapted to a diet so high in sugar, fat, and salt that they can't appreciate the saltiness in celery or in chard. And that's why when people go on a water fast and you refeed them, they're like, oh my God, this is so salty. So I'm not anti-salt for everyone, but I will say for some people, they may want to eliminate it or at least reduce it depending on what their goals are.
Thank you. Dr. Lome, I just want to quickly, at the beginning, I asked you about heart disease and stroke. Does erectile dysfunction fall in that same category?
Yes, indeed. And my last YouTube video was all about that, and it kind of it talks about how like Milton Mills said earlier, the atherosclerotic process that clogs the arteries of the heart. It's a whole body process. The brain, the aorta, and in men, the penile artery, right? And the deal is the penile artery. Sorry, guys, it's small. You have a small penile artery, and so if you get some plaque in that small penile artery compared to your other arteries, it doesn't take as much plaque to decrease blood flow and cause erectile dysfunction. And that's why they always say erectile dysfunction is that canary in the coal mine that precedes heart disease by a few years. And some preventative medicine experts do say that a guy with erectile dysfunction should be considered a heart disease patient until proven otherwise. And I think just the greatest thing in the world ever, the greatest scene, which is what was featured in that my last YouTube video, was that whole The Game Changers scene where they fed these young athletes a healthy meal one night and measured their erections at night, and then a less healthy meal. Actually, it was still organic grass-fed meats or something like that, but it was higher fat. It was animal-based protein. And they measured erections the following night, and the difference that one meal made in their endothelial function and how many minutes they had erections for, the circumference of their penis, was extraordinary. It was crazy how one meal can affect it. Can you imagine thousands of meals throughout your lifetime and what that's going to do to your arteries and your blood flow? So just like they talk about in the Forks Over Knives documentary and other lots of other things, men can reverse erectile dysfunction that's vascular related by going whole food, plant-based, low fat, by exercising, avoiding other things that damage your endothelium, tobacco products, all these things. You can reverse it just like you can heart disease. And it's, of course, the biggest added benefit is you reverse your erectile dysfunction, and then, hey, you're not going to have a heart attack or a stroke either. Your cancer risk goes down. Yay, you get the whole package all in one shebang.
Are there certain areas of the United States where the people of that area have no access to healthy food? Where is this? What is the reason? What impact does it have on the residents of that area? Does anyone want to comment on that?
I'm sure there's a lot of areas, not only where their access is poor, where they don't have like farmers markets and grocery stores that promote that, and there's more processed foods, more fast foods, what they call the food deserts. But I think a lot of the nowadays, thank goodness, with all these food delivery services, you can get things delivered. They tend to be more expensive. And I think the bigger issue is two things. Number one is fruits and vegetables. People have this perception that they're just too expensive. When you order them online, you get them delivered. If you order them organic, that's a problem. When you can find the right way and focus on beans and lentils and potatoes, they're dirt cheap. But I think that a lot of it is just actually more education as well. There's food deserts, and it makes it a huge issue. It's a big problem. And hopefully that's trying to be addressed, but there's still areas that it's abysmal. But if you educate people as about how important it is too, and we try to change the culture, hopefully that'll help. And there's no education, it's just not there. And so people just follow what tastes good, what's convenient, what's available, and that just results in what's not ideal.
I am currently working with a couple of groups where we are petitioning the USDA to alter the federal school lunch program to allow a non-dairy alternative for Black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, Pacific Islander children who are lactose intolerant, because right now it mandates that all children be provided dairy milk as part of their school lunch. And the USDA has a rule that if a parent wants their child to receive something other than dairy milk on their school lunch tray, they literally have to go to a doctor, have that doctor write a letter stating that the child needs, is lactose intolerant and needs something other than dairy. And then the parent brings the letter to the school where the child is enrolled. And the letter is then taken by the school administrator and goes into the system. And somehow, some way, then they will hopefully find a way to provide the non-dairy alternative for that child. First of all, participation in the school lunch program is needs-based, meaning that the child is allowed to receive the lunch because the family's poor. So requiring that poor people make doctor's appointments to receive, in order to get some letter is an unfair burden to begin with. But you know, being Black is not an illness, and it is reprehensible to require people to get a doctor's excuse for something that is a normal condition. But this is the state of racism in our federal school lunch program. And yeah, you hear an edge developing in my voice because this makes me extremely angry. But this is what people of color have to go through when dealing with our government. For everybody who's out there listening to this right now, it'd be really nice if you sent letters, emails, whatever you can to your representative telling them they need to change the federal school lunch program right now, because this is cruel to provide food to these children that they know is going to make them sick. 75% of African Americans, 74% of Native Americans, 90 to 95% of Asian Americans, 54% of Hispanic Americans are lactose intolerant relative to only 30% of white Americans. That means that forcing these children to take this dairy milk is going to make them sick. And this is almost certainly part of the reason we see this persistent achievement gap between children of color and white kids. Because while the white children are able to study with no problem, the children of color are sick from the crap that they're being fed. So we need to stop this. So yeah, there's a problem with people with people being able to access healthy food. And part of it is coming from our government.
Dr. Mills, after the 17-day conference is over, maybe you could contact me. I'd be interested in helping you with that and reaching out to our audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Steve. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Next question. In terms of nutritional supplements, what is it that you tell people? What do each of the four of you say? Are there certain ones that are absolute you have to take? Do you say don't take any? What is your basic answer to people when they say, what should I be doing in terms of nutritional supplement? What do each of the four of you normally say?
I categorize this as notable nutrients, which you could find out more about on my website on plantbaseddietitian.com. I have posts and videos about this, but anyone on a plant-based diet needs to take B12. It's really, really important. I have all my clients supplementing with B12. Vitamin D has become an issue around the world, exclusive of what diet you're on. And so vitamin D needs to be addressed, but it's not something that you could blindly supplement because it's a fat-soluble nutrient versus B12, which is a water-soluble nutrient. And then there's vitamin K2 is questionably potential for supplementing. And the two minerals are iodine and zinc on a plant-based diet. And then one needs to consider the omega-3 fatty acids, the long chain EPA and DHA, and potentially supplement with those too. And there's reasons for all five of those, plus the macronutrient. But I have most of my clients just take a multivitamin to cover their basis and not have to worry about it.
Thank you.
I think one thing I tell my patients is it's recommended all Americans over the age of 50 take B12. It's not just a vegan diet thing. The absorption of B12 goes down over time in the gut. Everybody should be on it. And so that automatically is like, okay, fine, I need B12. Because they always be like, oh, why is this? If the vegan diet is so great, why is it that you need all these supplements? You get that question quite a bit. And you could argue, many different points about it, but at least with the B12, it's easy argument that, oh yeah, we wash our food now. And where do you think that people who eat animal-based foods get their B12 from? Where do most B12 supplements go to? They're given to the cows and the pigs and the chickens. That's where most B12 supplements go to anyways. But anyways, so the B12 thing definitely makes sense because it can be a big deal if you become deficient. Vitamin D is only if your levels are low. And I still think that it's a challenge to tease out the data. Again, you got to give a good science-based recommendation. It's a challenge. The omega-3s is probably an important thing to supplement. The algae-based. Is the science super strong and clear? It's not super solid, but I mean, it's not going to be harmful, honestly, as far as we know, to supplement those omega-3s. Definitely, if you're using the ground flax and such, you should be fine. There are omega-3 indexes that you could order and see how you're doing in your blood work. Are they well validated? Do you know outcomes if you fix those abnormalities by supplementing? That science, unfortunately, is very weak. And of course, the reason the science is weak is there's no money to be made in this stuff. So nobody funds a study. You can't patent, these things for the most part. So that's pretty much where I stop. I say B12 for sure. The omega-3s probably should be a good idea. Vitamin D if your level's low. The K2 thing, and people are willing to try to do everything. I think it's also reasonable as well. There's some good data in cardiovascular disease and K2. But I think that one of the bigger points that people just need to think about in general is just natural remedies and natural supplements are not regulated by the FDA. The science is frequently weak. The marketing claims are very, very enticing, but a majority of these weird extracts and concoctions that are out there are not, you should not be buying into that stuff. Don't be duped by the Gundrys of the world selling their lectin blockers and other things. Really just, keep it simple. B12, vitamin D, omega-3s, K2, maybe iodine and zinc, and that's it. Nothing else.
Okay. I got what I call the essentials and then the stuff if you want to. And this is going to be kind of a lengthy explanation, so it's good that we have a couple of hours. All right, the essentials. B12. Why B12? All B12 is made by bacteria. Again, all B12 is made by bacteria. No plant, no animal makes B12. And because we live in these artificial plastic, steel, concrete environments we've created for ourselves. We have eliminated natural sources of B12, and we sterilize our water, we wash our food. So that's why we have to take the supplement. Has nothing to do with the diet being deficient. It has to do with these concrete jungles we created and live in. So that's why we take the supplement, because we don't have access to natural sources, period. D3, I try never to call it vitamin D. Why? Because the only reason it's called vitamin D is because the dairy industry started dumping it into dairy products, and they called it vitamin D to entice people into buying that swill that they were marketing to people. It is not a vitamin. It is a hormone we would all make if we were running around butt naked in the sun as God intended, but we're not. We are clothed, we live in these buildings, and even when we're outside, we're covered up. So how much should we take? Well, there were actually studies that were done on Bushmen in South Africa that showed that they made somewhere between 15 to 20,000 IUs a day. So I think the sweet spot for us is about 5,000 IUs a day will put us at a level that will give us enough to replete all of the immune cells in our body, keep us from getting depressed, help us to have strong bones, and get us right where we need to be. So that's what I recommend to people, 5,000 IUs every day with a meal. I agree with the minerals, iodine, and occasional zinc, just because, again, because of the soils that we grow our food on, we don't get enough. Now, what about the optionals? Most of the plant foods that we eat are domesticated, meaning that we have selectively grown these plants for appearance. And, you know, it's like a person that you meet in college, and there's two people you see in class. One of them is really nerdy and studies all the time. And then one of them is either incredibly beautiful or really handsome. And that person spends a lot of time in the mirror or a lot of time in the gym. Well, you know, the person that's in the gym working out or in the mirror fixing their face all the time spends less time hitting the books. So they're going to look really good, but they're going to have less in their brain. And if you're picking your plants based on appearance, they're putting all of their energy into growing big and looking pretty as opposed to manufacturing nutrients. And that's why when you compare cultivated plants to their wild relatives, they have somewhat lower content of various nutrients and phytochemicals. So if somebody wants to take a multivitamin that has some extra, carotenoids or something else in it to turbocharge what they're getting from their plants, I don't think it's a bad idea. Do I think it's absolutely necessary? No, but if they want to do it, I don't think it's a bad idea, because I do think we have slightly bred out some of the nutrients from the foods that we eat, but that's why I say it's optional. But the ones that are essential, B12, D3, good idea to do iodine and I guess zinc occasionally. And those are my recommendations.
Thank you. Chef AJ, you want to add anything on the supplements?
I agree with everyone said. As a chef, I can't really recommend people take supplements, so I refer them to people that are like people on this panel. I personally take B12, and that is recommended for all vegans as far as I know.
Okay. In terms of alcohol 1, coconut oil 2, fish oil 3, statins 4, what would you like to say about those 4 things? Alcohol 1, coconut oil 2, fish oil 3, and statins 4. Anyone want to offer feedback on those 4 topics?
Can I jump in real quick? Because actually, I meant to say something about the omega-3s, and since that segues into the fish oil, I want to say this before I forget it. Jeff Palmer found a really brilliant article that that actually showed that looking at people who are plant-based, what this article showed was that it is that we don't really need to take in preformed long chain omega-3 fatty acids, because if we have enough of the 18 carbon omega-3 fatty acids, our cells will elongate to the 20-22 carbon EPA DHA as needed, and that there are other I'll get the article and share it with you, and that's the better way to go, rather than taking the already preformed versions. That the cells function better when they're allowed to elongate as needed, as opposed to giving them the preformed product. And that as long as we have enough of the 18 carbon, I always get the linoleic versus linolenic mixed up. So I just want to say the 18 carbon omega-3 in our bodies. And as long as the cells are replete with that, they will, again, elongate that as needed, and provided we're also not taking in too much omega-6 extracted oils. So that's something I think we should focus on. Plant-based omega-3s in adequate amounts, and we'll be good. There's no such thing as fish oils. Any oil found in fish actually came from algae. If it's in fish, it's no good because the fish is dead. You shouldn't be eating dead fish. So please, the studies on so-called fish oils show that they are not effective for preventing heart disease. And I tell people, fish oil is about as good for you as it is for that fish it came from. It's no good. Statins are most useful for people who have, in my opinion, inborn errors of lipid metabolism that cause them to have massively elevated cholesterol values that predispose them to early heart disease and have a documented family history of early heart disease. And provided you can find a statin that they can tolerate without causing muscle and liver damage. And or if they are unwilling to make the dietary changes to bring their cholesterol levels within range to prevent development of heart disease. But the best way to prevent heart disease is to change their diet to bring their cholesterol values down, my opinion.
So the question was on alcohol, coconut oil, oil
yeah.
statins. Anyone want to comment on
coconut oil is a heavily saturated fat. I would say used with caution, if at all. And alcohol is a toxin. Any amount will kill brain and liver cells and raise your risk for cancer. So does that mean never do it? I can't say that, because if it's a risk benefit ratio. If you want to go out occasionally and have a drink or two with friends, that's up, that's the person has to weigh that risk. But you have to be really, really conscious of the risk and decide, this is the relative risk of a couple of drinks, once a month, once or twice a month is relatively low. I think I'm okay. But if you're having a couple of drinks every single day, or if you're having more than a couple of drinks every single day, that gets to be a significant risk I think you really need to rethink that. If for a woman, if you're having more than 1 or 2 drinks a day, for a guy, if you're having more than 2 to 4 drinks a day, you are really raising your risk for developing. In women, it's breast cancer. In men, it's throat and bladder cancer, I believe, are the top cancers. Head and neck cancers in men. Excuse me.
Anyone else want to comment on alcohol, coconut oil, fish oil, or statins?
Yeah,
You're
you're muted. Dr. Lome, you're muted. I see your lips moving, but you're muted. So if you don't mind, I'll just say what I'm thinking. A very wise doctor once told me, whenever there's a question, whenever there's a problem, look to nature. And do you see any statins on trees or coconut oil on trees? Or grapes could ferment and become alcohol, but do you see any wine anywhere in nature? And what was the fourth one?
coconut oil and fish oil.
Well, fish oil, yeah. So again, our lives being improved by these items. I don't know, everything in life is a cost benefit analysis and people have to decide for themselves. I think coconut oil is a terrific makeup remover. I think it's fantastic for a moisturizer, but I wouldn't put it in my body. And, this is somebody who went to raw vegan culinary school where this was like, that's what we were doing, is making desserts out of coconut oil and agave. And they were saying this was healthy. I can't remember which documentary now, but it was the doctor in Las Vegas, Dr. Evan Allen, of talking about the miracle coconut oil. He says the miracle is that anybody believes it's good for you. I mean, Dr. John McDougall has been saying for years that coconuts come in hard shells for a reason. And as a culinary school graduate, I cannot tell you how hard it is to open a coconut, even when you've been trained and have the right tools. So for these people that are paleo and keto to think that, this is our natural food, first of all, coconuts don't grow everywhere. And even when they do, have you ever tried to open one? I mean, seriously. So I think coconut oil is one of the most ridiculous scams in the world. And it drives me crazy that anyone would think it's a health food. They go, oh, but it's antimicrobial. Well, alcohol is too. So let's just all bathe in it. I mean, there's just it drives me crazy about coconut oil. Fish oil, I can't speak to deficiencies in that area, but I will say that whatever there is a deficiency for, there's a solution in the plant-based world. So if somebody felt that they really needed something that was in fish or fish oil, I know that there's got to be a plant-based source that's as good, if not superior. Statins I can't address. I'm not a doctor, but my feeling is whatever you do, avoid doctors and medications if you can. Use food as medicine. And alcohol, another saying by Dr. John McDougall is people want good news about their bad habits. And people say, oh, red wine's good for you. It's got, we have a cardiologist here that could say it's the reverse control or whatever it's called. Guess what? Whatever is good for you in the olive oil came from the olive. Whatever's good for you in the alcohol came from the grape. The new research now from Oxford University saying that any amount, even moderate drinking, compromises brain health, and now think the Shirzais are coming out saying that it's terrible for your brain. And unless you want to get Alzheimer's. So, before we knew about the link with alcohol and cancer and breast cancer, I remember hearing a lecture by Dr. Tom Campbell saying alcohol creates cancer in every part of the body it touches. If people want to drink, they can drink. This isn't a court-ordered program, but it really depends what your goals are. And if it's optimal health, and especially if it's weight loss, I don't see how adding coconut oil and alcohol to an already superior diet is really going to help you reach those goals. One thing I did forget to say, and I'm sorry, but about the salt, there is a new product now called green salt, and it's made out of a sea asparagus, and it is salt, but it's 50% less sodium, and it's absolutely delicious. So for people that really want salt, that's what I'm recommending now.
Awesome. What I would say is I agree with everything that everybody said so far. With alcohol, there's no safe amount. Even the smallest amount increases cancer risk, can raise blood. Everybody's a little different about how it affects their blood pressure. The American Heart Association guidelines for the longest time have said, 1 for a woman, 2 for a man, don't exceed that per day with drinks. And yeah, sure. So alcohol might not cause the clogging of arteries, the atherosclerotic process to a large degree, like animal-based foods or tobacco. can, but it can do other things more indirectly in the long term that affects heart health, raise blood pressure, make you gain weight from the calories, and cause other metabolic disturbances. There's a lot of individual variability about, how much people can tolerate in regards to alcohol for heart disease, but for cancer, any amount will increase cancer risk. Should you never drink alcohol? Well, it's the analogy I think of when you talk about the risk-benefit ratio with alcohol. It's like, well, every time you walk out into the sun, you're getting exposed to the sun can cause skin cancer, right? So does that mean I should never walk out of the sun? Well, no, you need your vitamin D, so it's like, come on, risk benefit. So yeah, small amounts every once in a while, as long as everything else is healthy and you're eating the proper diet, exercising, your weight's good. Is it going to be devastating to your health? Probably not. But that's also similar to saying, well, if I only smoked one cigarette a month, is that really going to hurt me? Well, probably not, but cigarettes can be very addictive. So can alcohol. So you just got to be careful not to let it, get out of hand. About coconut oil, agree with everybody else, huge saturated fat content in coconut oil. The controlled feeding studies, which I think is really interesting, a lot of people don't go back to way back decades and decades ago, they showed any amount of saturated fat in the diet, any amount above 0% of calories will raise the LDL cholesterol, and LDL is extremely strongly linked with heart disease. So, you want to keep the saturated fat as low as you possibly can. And that includes coconut oil. And then fish oil. Everybody's, I think, really done a great job answering that fish oil, as Milton said, does not prevent heart disease. There's no good data. There's been multiple randomized controlled trials trying to show if there's any cardiovascular benefit for fish oil, and they failed to show that. Not only they failed to show it, but there is a pretty strong finding that prostate cancer in men is increased if you take fish oil. And it's not just prostate cancer, it's the aggressive prostate cancer, because prostate cancer sometimes isn't as aggressive. It takes years and years, but the aggressive prostate cancer risk could be significantly higher in men who take fish oil. And when somebody says to me, oh, but I need to take fish oil or I need to eat fish to get omega-3s, I'm like, no, that's like saying I need to eat a Snickers bar to get peanuts. You don't need to do that. You get all this other baggage that comes with it, right? So when you're thinking about the fish oil and eating the fish to get the fish oil, I always tell them the baggage, the cholesterol, the saturated fat, the dioxins, the mercury, all that other stuff that's coming in there. Fish oil is the biggest snake oil. It doesn't help for heart disease. We never recommend it. It's not in any guideline at all. And then the last is statins, which I guess should be something I speak on because that's my whole realm. And I agree that if you're eating whole food, plant-based, no oil, and low in fat, and your LDL comes down, most people will achieve an LDL cholesterol that's around that 70 range if you're really doing it properly. And that range is considered ideal for heart disease prevention. Now, there is a subset of people who eat whole food, plant-based, no oil, and their LDL sits around 90, 100, 110. You're like, what the heck do I do about that? And there's no good scientific answer. They haven't done trials. Should we give them statins? Should we not? Can we just leave it there because they're protecting their endothelium with a healthy diet so well that, okay, fine. And I've asked some of the experts. I've been doing this whole lifestyle medicine thing for about 6 or 7 years. And I remember Caldwell Esselstyn would say, if they're doing everything else perfect, whole food, plant-based, no oil, low fat, pounding the green leafies, he likes to talk about the high nitrate rich foods. If the LDL is a little above 70, don't worry about it. And then other experts, I remember, Neil Barnard has been doing this for decades. He was like, well, if it's only 100, if your LDL only comes down to 100 when you're eating perfectly, give it time. It's going to slowly creep down over years. You might notice 5 or 10 years from now, it comes down to 90 and then 80 and then 70. Some people, it just takes a little bit longer. So where statins come into play is the patient who won't change their diet. They won't do it. Yeah, and I agree. The genetic components of the people whose LDL cholesterols are 300 and are not dietary affected, but that's rare. That's rare. I have so many people come to me with an LDL of 200 or an LDL of 250. I'm like, oh, it's genetic. It's genetic. I just need the meds. It's just genetic. Nothing I can do. No, you might be one of those hyper responders, those hypersensitive people to cholesterol and saturated fat. So I tell them, you need to do an experiment first. You need to experiment with yourself. Go strict whole food, plant-based, no oil for 1 month, repeat your lipid profile. And almost always, if they do it, their LDL drops to like less than 100 in like a month. And then it's like, oh, well, I guess it's not purely genetic, right? It was dietary. So, but in the people who will not change their diet, a lot of the randomized controlled trials are muddled by pharmaceutical industry and all those things. But really, there's so much data now that says that it still would be beneficial in those patients to protect the endothelium, to lower the LDL cholesterol low enough. And the guidelines from the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology do say in those instances for heart disease patients, they do have strong benefit. And other LDL lowering drugs, the Zetias and such of the world, don't have the good data. So it's not just the LDL lowering. Interestingly, statins were first found in the same fungus that penicillin was discovered in. And the mechanism of statins in the fungus was to act as an antibiotic to kill surrounding bacteria to allow the fungus to thrive. And so a lot of people think, well, the reason statins work is not just a cholesterol thing. They have this other, what they call pleiotropic effect. Maybe they're acting as an antibacterial, helping to knock out inflammation within the plaque to stabilize it so it doesn't rupture and trigger the infarct. So, I try so hard to not put patients on statins. I try so hard to get them to make everything, with diet and lifestyle. But there are that select few that if they don't change their diet, their LDL is high, they will get a benefit of reduction. It's only a small percentage though. It's only a small percentage reduction. I make sure that's clear to patients. Something called the number needed to treat. How many patients like that do I need to put on the statin to prevent one event? It's pretty high. It's like 70 or something like that, right? But when you're giving them to 7 million people, fine, you're saving, preventing a lot of events. But on an individual basis, the benefit of the statin is still pretty small. And I make sure to, a lot of doctors don't educate their patients on like, oh, if you don't take this, you're gonna have a heart attack. That's what they'll say. That's not true. It's a small percentage benefit, but it's there and it's, better than nothing.
Thank you. Julieanna, did you want to add anything before I turn it over to audience questions?
The only thing I would add to that is that I love coconut oil as a hair mask. It makes your hair really soft, but I would never eat it. Don't recommend it.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add, Dr. Lome just created this wonderful meme, that fish oil is really snake oil.
Okay. Chef AJ?
Yeah, what I want to say, and especially to the doctor and the dietitian here, we say, well, maybe a little bit of alcohol is okay, moderation is okay, but what is moderation? And if we live in a population over 70% are overweight or obese, clearly we have demonstrated that very few people are able to practice any kind of moderation. So to be recommending moderation to a nation full of addicts doesn't make sense to me.
Let me be clear. I wasn't saying moderation.
Well, I didn't say you, but
okay.
I wasn't speaking that you were saying that. I'm just saying when I hear people say, well, moderate drinking is okay.
I hate that term moderation. I don't believe in it. I'm like, can you do crack in moderation? No. Poison is poison.
I like Dr. Greger. He always says, what do you want? Moderate diabetes, just amputate a few toes. If it's in moderation, it's a horrible thing. Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Okay, thank you. If you would like to ask a question, click the reactions button and then click raise hand. So the bottom of the screen, it says reactions. Click on that and click raise hand, and I can call on you and you can ask your question directly to the speakers. Okay, so please click the raise hand button so we can call on you. Okay. Okay. Okay, Honor, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, and where are you from?
Japan. I've been pulling an all-nighter here, and it's well worth it. So, and my question this time is that several years ago, there were studies being done on whether cinnamon can help reduce your sugar numbers. And I tried with Ceylon cinnamon, as did a couple of friends. My numbers dropped like a rock. Are we anomalies? I've never heard any more all this time about what results were found from, say, NIH or Mayo or anybody else. I read the internet for my info. Does anybody there possibly have any knowledge of how well they went with the cinnamon?
Well, I would say personally, I don't really treat the diabetes directly. That's frequently primary care physicians and endocrinology. A lot more cardiologists are getting into it, but that they're more just pushing, the drugs for lowering sugar. I know I have read some studies, and Michael Greger's got some good videos on cinnamon and diabetes and insulin resistance. That there may be some benefit, but I think that even though there might be some benefit to lower blood sugars, lower hemoglobin A1Cs, there's a couple things that we need to think about whenever we think about an isolated nutrient put in a capsule. I mean, it's different if you eat it versus taking it in a capsule for sure. You always got to think about, is this going to improve an outcome, prevent a heart attack, prevent a stroke? Is this treating the underlying cause of the issue? So if somebody is whole food, plant-based, no oil, exercises at their ideal body weight, and they're still having insulin resistance problems, could cinnamon help? Maybe. It certainly would be worth a try, and every individual is different. If people have not made the proper changes, or they have weight to lose still, and they're not eating 100% whole food, plant-based, low fat, then that's a bigger thing to focus on. I know cinnamon is easier to add it to your diet versus cutting out the processed foods, the animal foods. But what we really always want, whether it's a supplement, adding a food to your diet, in the ideal situation, which is the struggle that I always have with a lot of natural remedies, you always want to have an outcome, a randomized controlled trial. You want to follow the science. You want to be able to show that not only does a substance improve a number, whether it's a blood sugar, a blood pressure, a cholesterol number, a hemoglobin A1C, but it also improves outcomes. It prevents the kidney damage, it prevents the neuropathy, it prevents the heart attack or the stroke, it makes you live longer. And the fact is that a lot of these natural remedies, they don't have that data, and they won't have that data because there's no money in it. You can't patent cinnamon, so nobody's going to spend the millions of dollars on it, and that sucks. It really sucks. So what I would say to somebody who said, hey, I want to try cinnamon to lower my blood sugar, I think there's some data. I said, yeah, great, sure, go for it. I don't think there's any harm. I prefer you eat the cinnamon instead of taking it in some kind of a capsule form that's more natural in the diet. And I would say, but don't forget, don't rely on that. Rely on the other things, the eating whole food, plant-based, low fat, staying physically active, trying to maintain a healthy weight. Those are the more important things to focus on. But I wouldn't recommend against cinnamon. Just try to consume it as a regular part of your diet and see how it goes. I wish there was more data and science and research to show out, improved outcomes and such. And there's a suggestion, there's intriguing studies, and the ones you quote, I know I've seen some videos on nutritionfacts.org that kind of talk about some of these things. It's very intriguing, but is somebody going to run with it and spend $100 million to prove it? You can't patent it, so it's probably not going to happen. And that's the honest truth.
Sharon, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
I'm from Washington State. You mentioned some of the supplements, K2, iodine, zinc, and B12, but you didn't mention how much of each one. And for DHA, how much flax, chia, or hemp seed should I use?
This is a good question. I'm happy to answer. With B12, I always say it's the pickiest vitamin with an attitude problem because it has a very interesting absorption curve. And so I have these recommendations posted everywhere, but the recommendations, generally speaking, are to have either 50 micrograms twice a day, 150 micrograms once a day, or 2,000 or 2,500 micrograms once a week. So you could dose it up in those three different ways. Those seem to be the best in terms of absorption. And then D, it depends on your blood level, but a good average for most people, like an okay safe dose of vitamin D is about 2,000 IU, but I recommend my clients get their blood tested first because you want to know what you're dealing with. And people are vitamin D is really interesting. And then iodine is just, we need 150 micrograms a day. Just generally speaking, that's the IOM for an adult. And for the long chain fatty acids, if you're doing it from the ALA, the alpha linolenic acid, which is what you're going to get from flaxseed, chia seed, hemp seed, walnuts, soy foods, then you can have about 1 or 2 like what I recommend for nuts and seeds generally like 1 or 2 ounces a day. But if you're incorporating that into it, it should be about I think it's about 1 tablespoon or so. But if you do we don't know about the long chain omega-3 fatty acids necessarily exactly. So we're kind of just recommending taking some of the ALA form from those foods I just mentioned. And if you're supplementing, to just find a supplement that has both EPA and DHA, and the dosing is kind of all over the place in the literature. This is really not one of those we know you have to take this much, like vitamin B12, which is so important and so understood in the literature. This is a little bit more fuzzy for now in terms of what we know.
Mary, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
I'm from St. Pete, Florida, and I really appreciate that information on nuts. Because I am eating way too many nuts. And for some reason, I thought nuts provided protein. My doctor isn't real super thrilled that I'm a vegan, and she was kind of pushing protein powder. And so like I thought nuts instead, but and I would say doctors don't, they push protein a lot. That's their emphasis, is getting your protein. And they don't think you can get protein from vegetables. And I know better. Thanks.
And that shows.
Can I jump in on this? Mary, please go to YouTube and type in Dr. Milton Mills, Chemistry for Understanding Nutrition, Protein, and it explains everything about protein. First of all, Americans eat way too much protein. Secondly, all protein is made by plants. Again, all protein is made by plants. You get plenty of protein on a plant-based diet. In my lecture, I explained where the protein comes from. You got your concentrated sources of plant proteins, which are your legumes, grains, nuts, and seeds. And then, but your vegetables and root vegetables are less concentrated, but there's still protein there. You have no problem getting protein on a plant-based diet, as long as you're getting enough calories. And then once you educate yourself with that, we'll have to look on finding you a doctor who has more sense. But yeah, you don't need to worry about that, sweetheart. You're fine.
100% agree. Check out the scene in the Game Changers where they talk about protein. I think they knocked that science out of the ballpark. It's as long as you eat adequate calories of unprocessed plant foods and you keep it a variety, again, don't just eat 20 bananas a day, keep it a variety, unprocessed and enough calories, you'll get enough protein. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Don't worry about the macronutrients, keep it a variety. I love Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen. Is a helpful app, which you can click every day that I got my 3 servings of legumes and I got my vegetables and I got my fruit and I got all that stuff to make sure you're keeping it a good variety. So just leave it at that. It's that easy.
Cynthia, would you like to ask a question, or where are you from?
I am calling from San Francisco, and yes, I would like to ask a question. Thank you for taking my call. I'm 68 years old. I've been described as having comorbidities. I've been diagnosed with cancer, had a mastectomy, 6 years in remission. I have rheumatoid arthritis, called moderate to severe. I've had 2 strokes at the age of 46 and another one at 54. I weigh between 125 and 30 pounds. That's what my range is. I'm currently on no medications. I'm whole food, plant based. My question is that, well, it's a observation. I feel like I'm compartmentalized as it relates to conventional Western medicine, and I need an integrative approach to my well-being. That's important to me. I'd like to at least make it to 75 or 80 if I can. What suggestions do you have for finding an integrative doctor that doesn't compartmentalize me, that doesn't focus just on the cancer or just on the rheumatoid arthritis? By the way, I did say I'm not on any medications. And I am whole food plant-based.
So I think the key is finding a doctor. I would always look for somebody who's board certified in lifestyle medicine, that practices science-based, evidence-based nutritional practices. Avoid things that are more cash pay, because there's a lot of hoaxes, a lot of bad doctors selling remedies that aren't good, and these weird alternative therapies that really aren't as science-based. I would say to avoid that. And if you go to plantbaseddocs.org, hopefully you'll find some kind of a general practitioner that won't compartmentalize things and just look at one disease process in its isolation, because you're a very smart person that that's one of our problems in the medical world is we have all these specialties, we focus on the one organ, but everything's connected in a massive way. And it's a whole body thing. Just again, the default state of the human body is to be healthy, do the right things, and hopefully the body should have its own healing mechanisms to do things right and put your health back in order. So yeah, plantbaseddocs.org, find a lifestyle medicine board certified physician, and hopefully that will be the right way to go for you.
Yeah, I agree with everything he said. And just if you drive, you might look at True North, which is fairly close to you, and or contact the Stanford Center for Research and Disease Prevention down in Palo Alto, which is, again, not too far from you. Those places might be within easy reach if you can't find someone on the plantbaseddocs.org.
And I would also add that almost all of the practitioners at True North can do telehealth coaching now. And there's so many wonderful plant-based doctors that can see you in any state in the United States as well as abroad, such as plant-based telehealth. Lori Marbus and Dr. Clapper, who spoke today, are two of their doctors. There's Planted Forward with Dr. Vanessa Mendez. So there's really so many options now virtually to see a wonderful plant-based doctor if you don't have one in your community.
Rita, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Yes, thank you, Steve. I'm from Long Island, New York, and appreciate the panel discussion. The quick question on the oil, it is so confusing. Here we are saying no oil or very little oil, and the Dale Bredeson's protocol calls for the MCT oil 3 tablespoons, just the 1 tablespoon itself has 14 grams of saturated fat as a MCT because you need for the brain. It is confusing. So can somebody want to shed the light that what should be telling people where their protocol clearly calls for it? So MCT oil, phosphatidylcholine, primrose oil, that adds up to a lot of 80 to 85% of the meal should be the fat.
What protocol was that again?
Well, the Dale Bredeson's, check with him. I think, yeah, they are your colleagues. And, for the Alzheimer's, for the dementia, this MCT oil, like the 3 tablespoons of MCT oil, 1 teaspoon of PC, phosphatidylcholine, then primrose oil, then the nuts and seeds, because the brain needs fat. How are we going to justify, because it is so confusing for people, no oil versus so much oil, so much saturated fat.
Well, what I would say is
MCT oil.
The data on saturated fat is there's no question about it. The saturated fat increases cardiovascular disease risk and stroke risk in general, no matter where the saturated fat comes from, whether it's plant-based saturated fat or animal-based saturated fat. Now, if you already have Alzheimer's or some dementia or something like that, that's not my area of expertise, but for healthy people, you got to ask a question: has this protocol that you speak of been shown to prevent heart attacks, prevent strokes, or make people live longer in randomized controlled trials and in good longevity studies? When you look at all the blue zones, the longest living cultures in the world, they don't do this protocol. And it's not a part of the natural diet. It's not the way nature intended you to get your nutrients. It's still, MCT oil is still highly processed and just not the right thing. So looking at science, you always want to see outcome data of prevention, preventing a heart attack, stroke, improving mortality. And these things certainly don't exist for what you speak of.
Daniel, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Hi, I live in Victoria in Canada, and I have a number of questions. I came late, so I hope I'm not repeating questions. But I listened to Chef AG's seminar on weight loss. It was terrific, by the way. I have to thank you. And nobody spoke about organic vegetables, and what's the take on that? Which vegetables should you buy organic and which ones should you not?
Well, you could always default to the Daily Dozen. I mean, not the Daily Dozen, the what's it called? The
Dirty
dozen.
Dozen.
Dirty Dozen. Thank you. The Dirty Dozen and the Clean 50. Yeah, you could always kind of look at that website to see the annual updates to the foods that you should optimize in terms of organic. But the research is really kind of clear that if you're choosing between organic vegetables and not organic vegetables and not having vegetables, you're better off to have the extra serving of vegetables. So it's always good if you can do organic. It's better for the soil. It's better for the, reduced pesticides, but it's not always accessible for a lot of people. And you're better off just making sure you're eating enough of those fruits and vegetables. So organic when you can, but if you can't, you're still better off opting for eating those fruits and vegetables.
Ainsley, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Hi, I'm from Trinidad. The question I have to ask, and I'm surprised nobody has mentioned it, and it is a very touchy one. Manuka honey. Now, it falls between vegan, not vegan, and that conversation could go on for hours. How are we to view Manuka honey? Anybody?
Well, it's not vegan, and the bees didn't make it for you, so I don't recommend eating it. And plus, it's still a concentrated sweetener, and all concentrated sweeteners are 1,800 calories. So it goes back to, well, should we eat fruit? I would much rather see people eat fruit, which is 200 to 300 calories, than concentrated sugars. And I don't see what benefit that you're getting from eating honey that you could get in another way. So as an ethical vegan, I give a thumbs down to honey. It harms the bees. And it's why do you need it? I would ask, what do you need it for?
Isabel, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Hi, I'm from Auckland, New Zealand. I'm just wondering because I cannot eat without salt, and only use salt on my dinner because on the morning I have my oats and at lunchtime I have a smoothie. But I want to know if all the salt are equal, and what you think about the Himalayan pink Himalayan salt, please. And how much should I have?
So I don't know if I heard all the question, but I do know that pink Himalayan salt, it's still salt. It's still sodium chloride. So salt is salt. So that there's no good data really to say that one is better than the other, especially with hypertension and heart failure. And, if you're, asking the question about salt in general, like we previously discussed, if you exercise a lot, sweat a lot, was a good Mayo Clinic study that showed that people who really work hard, sweat heavily, salt doesn't really affect their blood pressure to a significant degree, versus a group of people they fed extra salt to and did not have them exercise and sweat. I don't know if I answered your complete question, so if anybody else wants to chime in.
Well, the other recommendation, I'll just throw this out there. If you are going to have salt, then at least get iodized salt, and all those other salts are not iodized, because that is the way to get iodine. And that's the reason that we're having this kind of depletion of iodine in the diet of late, because people are choosing these fancy salts, but it is still salt. So if you're going to include salt, then try to do the iodized salt and do it at the end right before you eat it, so you can decrease the total consumption.
Stephanie, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Hi, I'm from DC. Thank you guys for doing this and taking the time to answer our questions. So my question is, I recently got diagnosed with high blood pressure and tachycardia, and I'm a 39-year-old relatively healthy female, and the doctors could never figure out where it came from, what the root causes, why. It was always a mystery. So I recently had a consultation with a naturopath online, and she suggested something I had never heard of. She said, because I have had PCOS my whole life and have this insulin resistance issue, she thinks it's because I have candida, and the candida is like dehydrating me, which is causing all these like blood pressure issues and tachycardia and stuff. And I just don't know. There's so much different information out there. I don't know what to believe or not. So what do you guys think of that? And do you know anything about candida or could shed any light on this?
Well, what I would say is, first of all, a lot of different types of doctors out there are not evidence-based or science-based. That's the biggest criticism for functional medicine, for homeopathic medicine, naturopathic medicine, is you can't show me published data to show, benefits to some of the therapies. And that doesn't mean they don't all work. It's just they haven't been proven, and it's harder to convince people who follow the strict scientific approach that those remedies are appropriate. What I would say, though, about hypertension is following the recommendations from the American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association guidelines, of which Kim Williams, very renowned plant-based cardiologist, was on the writing committee. They would say that if you're exercising the proper amount, if you're at your ideal body weight, which don't forget is very thin, if you're restricting the salt in the diet, you don't have uncontrolled sleep apnea, which is a big driver for resistant hypertension. If you're excluding alcohol completely, because some people are very alcohol sensitive, raising blood pressure. If you're doing everything absolutely perfect from a lifestyle perspective, eating a whole food plant-based diet that's low in fat, and you still have elevated blood pressure readings, then you really got to be thinking about what we call secondary causes. I don't know any data about Candida specifically being a secondary cause of hypertension. There are some rare hormonal diseases, adrenal hormones and pituitary, Cushing's, all these other things that could happen. They're unusual. A vast majority, well more than 90% of hypertension is eliminated if you strictly follow the lifestyle medicine recommendations for hypertension, the exercise, the ideal body weight, eating whole food, plant-based, restricting salt and alcohol. And so if your blood pressure is still elevated, finding a lifestyle medicine physician who can help you work up secondary causes of hypertension would be an important thing to do.
Let me jump in on this. You said you're in DC, so Candida is a ridiculous catch-all term that these people throw around. If you had Candida in your blood, you'd be in the hospital with sepsis. It's not Candida. There's a vegan lifestyle physician in Washington, D.C. by the name of Dr. Theodore Watkins. Please look him up, go see him. He will help you out and put you on a plant-based diet and get you on the straight and narrow. He's evidence-based. That's what you need to get this straightened out, please. Theodore Watkins.
Okay, just as we wrap everything up, each of you, starting with Chef AJ, if people want to follow up with you, get your book, watch your videos, what's the best way to?
They're done. I got the last question.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Stephen, for all the tremendous work you do producing this conference and bringing this information to the masses. The best way to get in touch with me is through my website, which is my name, chefaj.com. And every day at 11 a.m. Pacific time for more than the last 2 years, I do a daily and live show on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter called Chef AJ Live. And I hope to see you there.
So just let me say, there's a lot of people in the health movement who are doing videos, who are doing books, who are doing websites. Chef AJ might have the most successful thing going. In other words, every day she interviews the very, very best plant-based doctors on the planet. And she's got an incredibly easy, charming way with them. So everyone is in a happy mood, giving out great information. She gets huge views, huge. So if you're saying who is an influencer in this world, in the health movement, Chef AJ's might be one of the biggest, if not, she's one of the biggest influencers. Her YouTube channel really tries to do a lot of what the real truth about health is. She brings in different experts every day, interviews them, gives them a forum to share their information. Sometimes they do a PowerPoint presentation. So this isn't like a side thing where, oh, and on the side I've got this YouTube. This is, full-time plus work producing and making that show and getting those speakers. So if you're looking for more content, the Chef AJ's YouTube channel is a huge production and definitely worth knowing about. What about, did you have a new book recently?
Yeah, and it's the 10th anniversary edition of Unprocessed. It's this time it has colored pictures, updated recipes, new recipes, and a foreword by Dr. John McDougall.
Okay. Julieanna, how about you? How do we get in touch with you? Are you available? Do you do phone consultations, Zoom calls, like to do nutrition? What's your availability if people want to connect and follow up with your work?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, you could find me at plantbaseddietitian.com. And I work with clients all over the world. I have a podcast, the Choose You Now podcast, and I have to show my new book too. This is my last book, the Choose You Now Diet. This just came out in December. And all of that is available on plantbaseddietitian.com.
What is your podcast? Because I found that a lot of times I find it hard to stay focused or interested. And I was listening to your podcast. I guess I was listening on YouTube. and I guess you had two other people and you were having fun and it was very interesting. And somehow it kept me more interested than other things that I listened to. And I was able to, while I was learning, you were answering the nutrition questions, but it was a very entertaining and upbeat podcast. How often do you have that?
Thank you. Well, we have a weekly release. We have interviews every Sunday. One's coming out tomorrow with Colleen Patrick Gaudreau tomorrow. And so I interview people on Sundays. And then once a month, we have the nutrition Q&A, which I do with my two producers, which is what you were probably referring to. So we do that once a month. And you could ask me anything on social media, and I try to get to everyone's questions as often as possible. And yes, thank you so much for saying that. You can find it on anywhere you listen to podcasts.
And if someone wants to use you as their nutritionist, they can set up a call and you'll do a Zoom call with them and take 2 sessions?
Yes. Yeah, no, I do. I see people all over the world, either via Zoom or phone or Skype or whatever you want to use right now. It's been so nice to have everything on telehealth finally. I've been trying to do this for 15 years, and it's really exciting to be able to access people all over the globe. Anyone that has any issues, just reach out to me. You can contact me directly on plantbaseddietitian.com.
Okay. And Dr. Mills, how about yourself? How would we follow up with you? Are you available to speak to? What projects do you have? How do we stay connected with you?
Just excuse me. I have someone I've got to refer to, Julieanna, so I wanted to get that down. Wow. I have a website. It's Dr. Milton Mills, plantbasednation.com. And I also actually have an essay in this book, Brother Vegan. Can everybody see that? And people, I guess, can reach out if they're interested in getting this book from me. Reach out through the website and we'll figure out how to get it to them. You can shoot me, contact me through the website, and I'll get back to you, or through PCRM, through the PCRM.org website. Reach out to me, contact them / Dr. Milton Mills, and they will forward the emails to me as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And Dr. Lome, how would we stay in touch with you or get involved? Are you available to speak to patients via Zoom? What's your situation?
And first of all, I just wanted to say thanks so much for having me here. This is such a great conference, and I love Chef AJ, Julieanna, Milton. You guys are just awesome. This was a great panel, and I'm going to probably be referring patients to you, Julieanna, as well. And I always send patients to see Chef AJ's show. Personally, I'm located in Monterey County. I do telehealth video visits and such for anybody in the state of California, but that's what my license is currently restricted to, unfortunately, is the state of California. Having said that, I've done a lot of other activism, a nonprofit organization called Plant-Based Nutrition Movement, PBNM.org, Plant-Based Nutrition Movement, PBNM.org, has a lot of phenomenal resources. It's predominantly based in the Chicagoland area in regards to the meetups and such in person, but they do a lot of online things. And so I'd recommend people check that out. I do have a website, heartstrong.com, which I put together as kind of a do-it-yourself lifestyle medicine approach. Do it at your own pace, educate yourself step by step, phase by phase, to help somebody get more on a whole food plant-based diet slowly. I used to be very active on YouTube. I got a YouTube channel. And I loved making those videos, but they were time consuming and I slowed down a bit. I hope to get back into that soon. If you just get on YouTube and search Stephen Lome, you'll find that. And then I'm on social media like Twitter @Steve Lome, and on Facebook, Dr. Stephen Lome too. And feel free to reach out to me, send me messages through social media, whatever you need.
Well, I really appreciate you spending the 2 hours today and the 25 years before this, getting ready for tonight, getting all the information and then freely sharing it with all of us. We really appreciate it. It's hard to get this information. If we could unmute the audience so we could all say thank you and appreciate all the time that you've put into making this happen. So thank you very much.
Thank
Oh
you.
my
Thank
gosh,
you very
this
much.
was
So much.
amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
everyone.
you so
Yeah,
much.
Thank you for the time.
night.
Isn't there?
Mr. Banyanon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You are amazing.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Excellent, excellent.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Stephen.
Have a great night. Sleep well, 8 hours.
When is the
Goed
next talk?
gewacht, Chef
8
AJ.
hours only.
Eat your dreams.
Come on.